All right, are we ready? We're live. Okay. All right. Thanks for everybody. Thanks for everybody's contributions in this Dash retreat. I've had a great time. It's been great being with everybody here locally and everybody globally as well. So I wasn't originally, I'm not going to talk an hour. So in case anybody's worried that I have yet another 1 hour long presentation, that's not going to happen. I just have a few other things that I wanted to say, wrap up with. And I wasn't even going to have slides for this last one, but I decided last minute to just throw some slides together. So don't take this as like this presentation isn't fully baked yet. It's just some of the thoughts that I've had over the past years and putting them together in a slide. And it kind of wraps up the first two presentations that I gave today or yesterday and the day before into what I think is kind of my recommendation of how we should move forward. And I'm just calling it Dash Ventures as a placeholder that kind of captures what I think we need. I think we need Dash Ventures. And by that, what I mean by that is sustainable value from Dash Capital and Dash Labor. And if you read or listened to my presentation yesterday, that's kind of what I call an economy. An economy is capital plus labor, and traditional economies have always had, this fight between capital and labor, and all the capitalists are doing bad things, and they're just the evil monocle guy, and then labor is always like, hey, we need more money, and we're gonna strike for our rights, and that happens in every economy. It's kind of unavoidable. And one of the themes that I'm trying to present over this retreat is that, we have capital, we have a monetary system, or at least something that we're trying to make a monetary system. And we have a little bit of a very small labor force. And like I said, I'd like that to grow and grow and grow, but how do you make that happen in a sustainable way that actually provides value is the question. So once again, just thank you from everybody that's contributed, donated money, Dash. So I introduced Dash Ventures, and I'll talk more about that. But first I wanted to zoom back out. I always like to zoom back out and try to figure out what we're trying to accomplish here. So what are we trying to build? I don't think that we're trying to build digital gold. That's what Bitcoin's building. I'm not interested in a speculative asset that has price fluctuations, very, very big price fluctuations. I'm not interested in digital oil either. That's what Ethereum, the Ethereum guys, they use this term themselves, at least the Bankless podcast guys. They say Ethereum is digital oil, meaning you need this commodity, this oil, in order to run this machine called Ethereum. And I guess they should probably call it digital gas, but gas is derived from oil, so I guess that works. And that is kind of the corporate model. I think it's this idea that we always need to be charging, the network itself needs to be charging gas fees for everything, for every computation, every storage, and then the network receives transaction fees in return. That's also not what I'm interested in. I actually think that users find fees very annoying. When I give cash to somebody, if I go into a gas station and if I give them cash, there's no transaction fee there. So that I think is actually the ideal. And if we're building digital cash, then that's what we should strive for. And we haven't really looked into that. I know there are other networks that have fee-less transactions, and I think that's possible, but that's not what my presentation's about. I'm just saying I don't think that maximizing the use of fees is a good idea. So the next bullet point down, digital lottery, and that's kind of what I throw all the other altcoins into besides Dash. So Digital gold was Bitcoin, digital oil is Ethereum, and digital lottery tickets is all the altcoins, the speculation, just hoping for pump and moon, all that stuff. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in digital cash and a digital cash economy that has both capital and a labor market that is stable in value so that people can plan their lives around it, both short-term and long-term, that you don't have crazy speculative booms and you don't have crazy busts either. That's a very objectively bad feature of markets. And the Austrians will call that the boom and bust cycle, the Austrian business cycle. And why that happens is a subject of a lot of discussion. Regardless, though, I do want more stability, both, and some people might not like that. Some people might not like a lot of stability because they want crazy booms. I will sacrifice the crazy booms for not having crazy busts. And that's easy to say in the bottom of a bear market. It's harder to say when you're climbing up and going to the moon. And what you really should be doing is then reinvesting some of that capital appreciation into your labor force so that a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, you have already created value through that labor force so that you don't have that bust period because there's increased demand, which I talked about yesterday. So I'm still in the zooming back here. The market for digital cash is only going to grow. There's been a little bit of doom and gloom in the past years and in this very retreat, but I think it's important that that we also recognize that this market is only growing from here. We are just beginning. It's kind of a trite thing to say because we always say it, but we're still in the very beginning and we need to stay positive. Dash is in a very good position still. In fact, like I said yesterday, we're one of the only players in this field. I think of Mark Mason when he always used to sign out his podcasts with "Stay positive," and I don't know who, stay humble, stay dashy. I'm a little bit of a doom and gloomer myself because I'm always dissatisfied with the current state, because I'm always trying to improve upon the current state. But it is important to stay positive, even at these bear market lows. So in the beginning, everybody was super excited about the potential of this project, and we therefore had this crazy boom, actually several times, and I think it's important to recognize that those days are over. We can't just rely on the hopes of speculation to appreciate this coin. We need to do the hard work right now. And the hard work is related to building companies within this economy, building our labor force that can provide value, the capital allocators, which are you and me, MNOs, and people that are underneath the Treasury allocating capital to certain projects. We need to figure out how to do this, and that comes back to venture capital. Venture capital is the industry that knows how to do this best, and they're the ones that have done this best in the traditional markets. So what is it really? Just as a very brief introduction, venture capital is startup funding from savers to labor, entrepreneurs. And I just have a couple quotes from a report that you see the link to. I asked one of my good friends who's been in venture capital for more than a decade to help me figure out, like, how has venture capital actually how have they succeeded in running the world, basically? And he sent me this report, and actually a couple of different reports. And these are a couple of quotes from them. Venture capital-backed companies account for 41% of total U.S. market capitalization. So you look at the S&P or any kind of stock index, and you look at all the entire capitalization, 41% of that was created by venture capitalists, that value. So they're doing something right. Among public companies founded within the last 50 years, so more recently, because there are a lot of companies that are actually older than 50 years in the market capitalization, but now focusing on the last 50 years. Among those public companies founded within the last 50 years, VC-backed companies account for half in number and 3/4 by value. So not just 71%, or not just 41%, but actually 75% by value from the past 50 years. And this is a very good report. I highly recommend everybody to read that to kind of see where that's coming from and how they did it. So funding goods and funding bads. I'm taking a little tangent here, back away from venture capital and into just funding in general. Goods are products that are derived through voluntary exchange. That's what I define as a good. And a bad would be something, it's not a technical term, not a lot of people use this, but there are goods, and those are voluntary exchange products. And then there are bads, there are products of involuntary exchange. And you can fund both of those, and governments do fund both of those, very, very much so. And that's actually that's part of the biggest problem with the world that we have today. Think about any industry. Think about healthcare. Think about the educational system. Think about technology. How terrible have they become in many ways? I understand technology has a lot of upsides as well, but think of all these industries and how the medical industry, how they've gone so far downhill. Think of the food industry, like how terrible is our food these days? And that's because governments are funding this stuff. They have the power to do that. So government and the Fed. But it's important to remember that so government and the Fed, it's not just bad because it prints money. It is bad, but it's because they print money to fund bads, not goods. And that's why it tries to stop others from competing with it, trying to create real goods in the society. So that's, I'm going to have more to say about that a little bit here. Now I want to take another little side tangent. Again, this is not fully flowing, but it's just some thoughts. When we look at the monetary system, which is funding goods or bads, there are essentially two camps. There's the Austrian School of Economics, and then there's what I've discovered in the past few years, the MMT, which is Modern Monetary Theory School of Economics. And I think that this is the broad spectrum. And then there are a lot of things in between. So on the Austrian side, which is what I came to crypto for, you have government hands off, like government has no role should have no role in the economy. And commodity money, the commodity money story. So the story of how money was created was through the Austrian tradition is that you had barter, and barter was inefficient for various reasons, but there emerged one commodity, which one or two, the precious metals, mostly gold, silver, that emerged as good commodities to be money. But that's how money came to be, is through those inefficiencies of barter. And on the Austrian side again, so they think that because money became a thing through natural forces and through no design specifically by anybody else, that printing money is bad. Like commodity money is the best, and printing money is always a bad thing. Austrian has a very rich, I wouldn't say it favors capital. I don't know if I should say it favors capital, but compared to the MMT side, it definitely favors more capital. Like the entrepreneur and capitalists are an important part of this story. But as I talked about I think yesterday, they're, I think, losing at the money game. Gold is not money anymore. Silver is not money. And then so now we go over to the MMT camp, modern monetary theory camp. They say that actually money did not come from barter and the inefficiencies of indirect exchange at all. It's actually has its roots in debt and government. That anytime a government wanted to set up, what's the term that they use? Provision itself is how they euphemistically call it. The government wants to provision itself, and so it creates a monetary system and it imposes a tax on all of its people. And then because there's a tax on all the people have to pay taxes, and that's what gives the money value. And in this sense, government is doing all of the printing of money, and that's a good thing because that's what we need. We need government. And I say it favors labor because a lot of the people, as I've listened to the podcasts and the material in this school of thought, most of them seem to be on the left and in the labor movements, and they're at least saying that it's important to have a strong labor force. Now, what I'm trying to do with all of this research that I've done in the past few years is trying to figure out where they're right and where they're wrong. Where are the Austrians right? Where are the Austrians wrong? Where is the MMT camp right? Where is the MMT camp wrong? Can we merge those two? And I'll just speak briefly about these things in between because I've been called a Keynesian in the past couple days for the things that I've talked about as I want to supercharge the Treasury. It's actually not really, that's more on the MMT side, but Keynesianism is kind of in between. You have these schools of thought like monetarism by Milton Friedman. He's the biggest advocate of this idea. And then you have free banking idea with Selgin and White being the leading proponents of this idea. And then you have Keynesianism. So these are kind of all in between these two spectrums of Austrian and MMT. And I'm sure if I really presented this to some of these economists like Selgin and White, they'd probably tear this apart to some degree and say, it's not in between really. But I think it's a fairly good framework. But anyway, the point is I've tried to, because I have this desire for Dash to be money and to have a real circular Dash economy, I've been doing a lot of research about economics, and I've come across all these things. And I think it's kind of important to look at the pros and cons of each of them. So free markets. Again, from yesterday's presentation, I've had some pushback, and I think people are thinking that I'm not a free market guy. But it's important to remember that we are all part of the free market in this. We are all dealing with voluntary exchange, and we're dealing with goods. So anything that is done voluntarily is the free market. But it's important to remember also that, ask yourself, are free markets spontaneous? I think a lot of people, again, in the Austrian camp, they tend to think, all we need to do is set up a system and then let it go. You set it up and then you don't change anything. The market will figure it out. Well, we are the market. If you're saying the market will figure it out, then who's the market? If nobody's going to try to do the hard work of how do you actually create value, then who is going to do that? I don't think that you can just set up a system, a monetary system, make a monetary supply schedule and then call it good and everything will figure itself out. Well, no, you still need people to use the money, and you need to figure out how to incentivize people to use the money instead of just using what's far better, which is fiat in terms of money. And as it relates to businesses, like how do you start businesses in an economy? Well, businesses always need some kind of financing. They always need to have some way of getting started. And usually that's either debt financing or equity financing. Debt financing, meaning you go to a bank, you get a small business loan, they give you some money, you're expected to pay that back. Equity financing is going through the VC route. You go to some VCs, they give you some money. You're not expected to pay that money back that they give you. You're expected to give them a share of the equity of the company. So if the company does well, then they get paid back ultimately by selling their shares when their vesting periods unlock, and then they can get far more money than if you just repaid the loan. And so we need something like this in the Dash economy, because that's how economies work. Every business needs some kind of startup funding. So we need to provide this. And I think actually, if we could provide both of these to some degree, debt financing and equity financing, where instead of just giving grants, so far we've been in a grant economy where we're just giving money out and we're just hoping for the best. And I think that can work to some degree if there's reputation involved and if there's results, and you continue to get funding based on your results. But I think we could formalize this a little bit better and say, hey, like, if we're going to give you 10,000 Dash, how about you try to start a business and pay that 10,000 Dash back, maybe with interest, or maybe even with a discount. Even if you paid 9,000 Dash back from what you got from the Treasury, 9,000 Dash back would be a lot better than no Dash back, which is what grants are. So anyway, that's just one idea of how to create loans. As I have a point here, they create future demand. So when you give somebody a loan of Dash instead of just a grant of Dash, they're expected to find revenue models within the economy and within the businesses that earn them some Dash, and then that's what creates demand for Dash, is creating those businesses that say, hey, if you want our goods and services, you want our products, you have to pay us some Dash. So you have to go find some Dash on the markets and figure out a way to pay us back. Now, I understand there's some complications, like who you're paying back, actually. You could burn it. One time, yeah, go.
How's it enforced?
How's it enforced? One time asks. I don't have all those answers yet, but I'm just talking about a macro framework here to work with. But I do think in general, having some kind of expectation of paying back would be an interesting idea to work with. It could be, call it the free markets or the forced markets, whatever you want to say, but the traditional markets, they have developed credit scores for things like this. So I think I'll move on because I've got a little bit more to say, and maybe this ends up being an hour after all, who knows? So back to venture capital. What's right with venture capital? Well, they know how to build, they know how to help entrepreneurs produce and grow. And they have a long history of doing that. And they provide the necessary activation energy for a business to get off the ground. You can't just start a business. You can some businesses, like if you want to open a massage parlor or whatever, all you need is a table and a roof over your head and your hands. But most businesses, they need significant amounts of capital to start with. They have an idea. The entrepreneur goes to a venture capital, pitches his idea and says, this is my idea. I'm going to need some capital to start this. And the VC says, this is a great idea. I'm going to give you $1 million, maybe $500,000, some amount of seed funding. And then they go through several phases of raises after that, if they've achieved certain targets or whatnot. That's all good, right? That's all necessary. In fact, I have a little, let's see if I can get there. I have a little video that we don't need sound for, but I want to play as a visual demonstration idea. And I will explain what's going on. It's about a 1-minute video. So what's happening here is this is a hot plate underneath a beaker with some matches, and the hot plate is heating up, and eventually this hot plate will provide enough energy to create a chemical reaction between the phosphorus on the matches and the oxygen. And all that you needed to do is provide some energy. So I don't know if people know that, but you don't have to actually strike a match. Striking the match just creates friction, which creates heat, which puts energy into the elements, the molecules. And then once there's that amount of heat, then you actually see the reaction. But you don't actually need the strike. You just need the energy. And what what I'm drawing, this is the analogy that I'm drawing here, is that the match is like the beaker, catalyst. I'll just play it again while I'm talking through this. The hot plate is I'm analogizing to funding for a company. If that hot plate isn't quite hot enough, you can imagine that you could just keep heating this match. It would never actually combust unless you get up to a certain energy. It's called the activation energy. And once you get to that, then you see a big burst. And what I'm thinking in Dash is that we have not quite reached that activation energy with a lot of our organizations. We've been dumping some money in, like we're dumping heat into this, onto this beaker. But until you dump enough money in, you're not going to see a spark. You're not going to see it ignite. And that's why I said a couple of days ago or yesterday that I think that we're actually putting too few resources into this, not too little, because you have to get to that point where it's actually going to combust. If you don't put enough in, then you end up wasting a bunch for no flame. And maybe you can see this little diagram here on my screen. This is the activation energy. So you put in a little. If you just keep putting in this much, you're not going to get the energy that you need to release and create that chemical reaction. So that's one thing that I had to say about that. That's what venture capital provides. It provides enough energy so that you can enough funding, in other words, so that you can actually get that combustion. And it doesn't pay off unless you actually get to a critical point. So what's wrong with VC though? What's wrong with venture capitalists? Well, I think that they have too many ties to the state. I recently watched a video from some of you are familiar with this, the All In podcast. They're like the pop culture VCs. They have a very, very good podcast. I listen to it a lot, but some of the things that they say, I disagree with, because some of them are very much statists. And one of them had her talk recently. I don't remember the number. It's not even close to what I'm going to say, but it's something like 3,466 miles was the title of the talk that this prominent venture capitalist gave. And the whole talk was about, he talked about how government's regulations are just stifling everything, and they're making the VC job so much more difficult than it can be. And at the very end of his talk, the punchline was, the reason the venture capitalist model and venture capital has been so successful, which it has, is because we're so damn far, or something like that, from DC. And that was the title of his talk, was there's 3,000 miles between Silicon Valley and Washington, DC. And that distance, like, that was his metaphor to saying, we don't do things the government way. But in fact, I think that the VC industry is much closer to government than they realize through the banking system and the ties that they have with that. So I probably could say a lot more about that, right? But I don't know if I will have the time to go into that. Part of it has to do with the exit strategies that they employ. There's both VC and then there's private equity. And a lot of times venture capital will get a company up going enough to the point where private equity, which is kind of a different branch of funding, private equity will acquire that company and buy it. And that's their exit strategy. Or they can do an initial public offering where they sell the company to purchasers on the open markets to the public. There are different ways, but this private equity thing, I need to look more into it. But I think that, like with the BlackRocks of the world, I think that there's a lot of pressure for the VC industry to build a company in such a way that it will be valuable to the state. So whether that's state influence on technology companies that want to spy on us, things like that, providing extra rounds of funding to bad food producers to put Monsanto and everything, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of that happens. And so what I'm proposing is that we need something like Dash Ventures. And I've actually registered this domain, but there's nothing going on with it right now, in the hopes that at some point we will figure out our funding mechanism and open up the Treasury to have more funding available for great projects, where we don't necessarily sell out to outside interests, just in order to get a gain on our stock valuations. Those outside interests being very closely tied with very cheap financing from the Federal Reserve through indirect ways. And what I want to do is fund goods instead of funding bads, and using Dash and the Dash economy to do that. And so in general, I don't want Dash to take VC money. I want Dash to give VC money. I want the smartest and the best, the most ethical, the most virtuous venture capitalists, who there probably are many of these in Silicon Valley, who are frustrated with the state of their industry and who might welcome the ability to create companies and fund companies that are more interested in building goods instead of bads. They're in this tough position where they need a buyer for their companies that they're incubating, and a lot of times the only real buyer is somebody that wants, like I said, vested interests in trying to take over these companies because they become popular and they want their users to be under the government's control. And like Evan, I don't want that in Dash. So we don't take VC money, but I think that we should find ways to give VC money and employ those great venture capitalists that are very smart at creating value in our economy. Let's see, why is it not clicking? Oh, I think that's the end of my slides. One thing. Any questions on any of that so far? How are we looking on time?
Here's a question. Come up. I got 25 minutes roughly.
Okay. I do want to say some other things about an unrelated thing to venture capital. But what's the question? And maybe I can take that right now.
Sorry. Guess you're not able to see, right?
By the way, here is, I'll just do a little screen share of this so that people know where that report was coming from. You can get it on this website, and we'll provide links maybe to this. And I'll just scroll through this on screen so that people can get a basic introduction of what I was talking about here. And then I have something else that I wanted to share that's not related to venture capital. I'll just scroll through until section 2 where it talks about methodology. Don't need that anymore. Yeah. Okay. Question. So why would somebody in their right mind take out a huge loan for a business, which in a year's time could potentially triple or quadruple their Dash in value? Their debt. So yeah, their debt. Yeah. It makes not too much sense. So part of the problem with this is, that the value of Dash is fluctuating so much so that we wouldn't be able to do that. We wouldn't be able to issue Dash loans. That is a problem. Like just to spell it out for people, if I take out a 1,000 Dash loan and I'm then expected to pay back 1,000 Dash, well, what happens if that 1,000 Dash today is $27, but when I end up having to pay it back, or through time paying it back, that value of Dash has gone up to $270, 10x or something like that. How am I going to be able to? I end up basically having to pay back the equivalent value of 10x of the loan that I took. And in that case, you would have mechanisms where you could either restructure the loans periodically, or you could just have agreements where you're not expected to pay back 100%. But the point is that anything better than a 0% return would be positive. And so you could actually just have people compete on what rates of return they're giving from the loan. So if I only am able to pay back 50% of the loan or 10% of the loan, that's better than paying back 0% of the loan. Go ahead one time.
And in theory, these ventures are part of what is catalyzing the rise in the price in the first place.
Yeah, I first of all, that would be a great problem to have. Like if the value of Dash is going up so much because of the ventures that we're creating, then that's a good problem to have in the first place. But in the second place, we can exercise more control over the monetary system in Dash so that we don't go up that high, and that is what central banks do. Somebody asked me this morning. Dandy in the discords. So basically he says, so you want to basically be the Federal Reserve? And I said, yes, but a good version of the Federal Reserve where we actually create money to fund goods and not create money to fund bads. So what's the difference between the diff as it exists and Dash Ventures as you propose it? So yeah, this is not something I'm formally proposing with Dash Ventures. I just snagged the domain just in case we can do something like this in the future. But I have no intention to do anything with it yet, anytime in the near future, while we have a handicapped treasury system that has a 10% or soon to be 20% lid on it. I would much rather see the diff. Well, the long answer, I would actually like to see both, right? So I want to see a diff. I want to see Dash Ventures. They could be different in their own ways. My preference for what Dash Ventures would be doing would be something that's closer. There's something like in between the diff and the incubator, where in the incubator, we have decided and we're dedicated to having all of our books, all of our financing, all of our tasks denominated in Dash. And that's what I would have in Dash Ventures. I would denominate our gains and losses in Dash terms. And I would try to have the companies that we're funding be using Dash as a transaction medium. So like if a startup is building a SaaS software service, we want that SaaS service to be accepting Dash. So that kind of stuff, I would just have it more oriented towards Dash and less oriented towards ROI in terms of US dollars. So any other questions? I'll just talk about this for now. This is just historical market capitalizations for various coins that I think are kind of somewhat competing. You can see obviously Bitcoin and Ethereum, they're doing well. This is a logarithmic chart. So, but the point I want to make with this is that price and market cap, they tend to more or less follow the whole industry. And obviously there's differences. Like you can see Zcash and Dash, we've fallen compared to where we were. We're all kind of together here, but then we separate with this cluster of whatever they are, Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash and Monero, I think is what these three are up here, and then Dash and Zcash down here. So there's some changes, but we're kind of all in an ocean. And so on the one hand, you can look at this and you can say, well, it doesn't really matter what we do. We can't control the price, but what we can control is our money supply, like I talked about yesterday. And we can try to create value, as much value as we can, so that despite the fact that so much of our market value is determined by things outside of our control, we can at least control what we can control. And then I'll switch over to here. One time, yes, please.
when you talk about ideally wanting to stabilize the price, I think there are kind of two factors. There's the volatility around like where the actual value is. The price is volatile and fluctuating, but then we do want to maximize that value. We want to have as high of a value as possible, and then a stable price around where the real value lies, and we want to have as high a value as possible.
Yeah. So if I'm going to be called central banker of Dash, then I would have a target of a steady appreciation instead of steady depreciation, which most central banks always target 2% depreciation. That's the same thing as saying 2% inflation. But yeah, like we would want to get up to, I mean, valuation is kind of determined by the market. It's not determined by any individual. So we don't really have too much control over that. But from an economic standpoint, if we're doubling or tripling or 5xing or whatever, that's a problem. We should probably address that.
So the underlying value that it's creating for the world, we want to create value for the world. So like even if that goes up steeply, we want to create value and then have a stabilized price around where the underlying value lies.
Yeah, just knowing what that underlying value is the challenge I'm saying. So what I wanted to say about this spreadsheet that I have put together here is we have market capitalization on the top here in terms of US dollars. We have I call it this green line is the supply curve of Dash. So you can see in the early days, the supply jumps up. And again, these are logarithmic charts so that I can see more trends in one view. This is the supply of Dash. You can see it's approaching the $10 million mark, 10 million Dash mark, and it surpassed 10 million here. So we're sitting at close to 11 million here. And then this blue line down here is the newly created Dash. These are daily numbers. So 2,000 Dash here per day, 2,000, 2,100 Dash. And the little spikes that you can see, anybody know what those spikes would be here? Super blocks. Yep, exactly. So every month you'll see a little spike, and that's the super block emitting more coins. And so you'll see these are 1 year major lines here, and then you'd see 12 little spikes in between each of these lines, just to give you an idea of the time frame that we're talking about. This is the very beginning of Dash, and this is current. So this is almost 10 years of data that we're looking at. And then you have the price right here. This is price in terms of US dollars. So the price in US dollars multiplied by the number of Dash gets us to this red line, which is the value in US dollars of the Dash that we're creating each day. So you can see like right here, most currently, we're creating $33,000, $34,000 every day of new Dash, which in Dash terms is obviously less than that. This value is what we're creating in terms of generation in terms of Dash, and then this value is that the market value in terms of US dollars of that daily Dash. So right now we're creating about $32,000 worth of Dash out of thin air. What are we doing with it? We're sending most of it. You can see, the distance up to this line here. Most of that is still going to MNOs and miners, and these little chunks, these little blips. That's what's going to the treasury. So that just gives you an idea of the scale, and just keep in mind that this is a logarithmic chart. So on a linear chart, you'd see these spikes would be a lot higher, but it gives you an idea of the magnitude of where we're sending our Dash. And I think these spikes should be higher, much higher. And one thing I wanted to address is, I'll just show this real quick in case anybody's interested. This is our fees, we have the price in US dollars, and then the amount of fees that we're receiving on a daily basis in terms of Dash, and then you multiply those two together, and then you get this the fees in terms of dollars. So this is something that like Joelle's really worried about, that we're only getting $11 of fee revenue per day from our transaction fees. So I just wanted to mention that it's something that we could talk more about, but that's more Joelle's topic than mine. My topic is what I wanted to show here. This is these are all rates. So these are all in percentages, all of these trends. So on the orange line, you have the supply rate. This is the rate at which we're creating Dash. So in the early days, obviously we're creating a lot of Dash, and that was higher than 1,000% per year. These are daily numbers, but annualized. Typically you make these rates in terms of annual percentage yield, which, so this would be, as you come down here, this would be 200% per year. So in 2015, the beginning of 2015, we were sitting at a supply rate of 183% per year. Some people call that inflation, like especially the Austrians, they'll call that inflation. That's not what most economists call inflation. Most economists call inflation price inflation, which is this blue line. So how do I even get this price appreciation number? Because we don't have a CPI or anything in Dash. So what I've done is I've just basically taken, if you eliminate all of the goods prices and you just instead call it US dollar, how many US dollars you can buy with a given Dash, it's a reasonable proxy for inflation, or price. Sorry, let me back up. Price appreciation, the blue line, that's something different. The blue line is just how fast is the price appreciating. So the price of Dash. So this is, in the early days, it's off the charts. This is not a logarithmic chart. So it's way up higher than 1,000%. We were really increasing our value in the early days. And then it kind of comes down here. And then the bull run of 2017, it goes off the charts again. You can see it over 1,000% price appreciation. Now, if you flip that and you calculate what the price inflation would be, that would be your red line. So it's just the inverse, essentially, of price appreciation. And I just did that so that you could, what most economists call inflation is what you would see in this red line. And so just looking at recently, in 2022 is when price appreciation started falling well below zero, or well below one, or zero rather. So negative 72% price appreciation. That means it's dropping significantly. That would equate to an inflation rate in the hundreds. So somebody was asking, Amanda, you were commenting today about we've just the Dash price in the past years has dropped 90% or whatever. So that would be this blue line, the Dash price dropping a certain percent annualized. That's exactly the same thing as saying we've had not hyperinflation, but significant inflation, 20, 30%. So when the Fed comes out with their inflation numbers and they say, wow, we're getting really hot. It's really hot inflation right now. We're approaching 10%. Well, that's nothing, right? That's if we were tracking inflation in Dash, it would be 600%, 600% here, 300% here, and more recently in the past year, it's closer to 96% inflation. And again, when I say inflation, I'm typically meaning what most economists say is inflation, not supply rate inflation, but price inflation. If you have a Dash denominated income your prices are rising at 78% per year at this point right here. And it changes obviously all the time. So price deflation or deflation where the prices of goods are going down would be anything less than this zero line. That would be less than 0% inflation is deflation. That's what you want. So you want this red line to be below zero. So these are the good years for that. These were the good times for that. And the last thing that I'll say today is again, going back to my previous presentations about inflation, supply rate inflation, and whether that translates into goods price inflation. If you just do a scatter plot of the red line and the blue line to see if there's any correlation, I don't know if it should surprise anybody, but when you look at the time plot that we just had up, if you really were pressed, and had to say, does increasing the supply of dash, the dash that's emitted per year, increasing that rate, everybody, I think, would say, oh, that's going to decrease the price. Well, that should say that you should have a positive correlation between dash emission rate and inflation rate. That's what you would expect, but we don't see that. So the annuals here, you have the annual supply rate on the x-axis. So in the early days, like I was showing on the time plot, this supply rate, this orange curve, it was way high, like 200%. Now I've cut it off of the scale here, so you don't see any of that data, but you see the more relevant data, like 25%. Let me go back to this time rates one more time, just to show you. In recent times, we're sitting about a 5% supply rate inflation. We're increasing our supply of dash by 5% annually right now. That's our supply rate increase. And then back here to 9%, 37%. So basically, when I say 25% on the x-axis of that scatter plot, it's basically capturing all of the data from 2015, mid-July or so. That's when we had 25% or less supply rate inflation. And so do we have a clear positive trend? I think in the early days, or actually this is the most recent data, because this is between 5% and 10% annual supply rate inflation. This is the most recent data. This is probably from 5% to 10% is, here's 7%, here's 8%, 9%. So we got to about 10% decrease to a 10% supply rate inflation rate in 2019 to the present. The axes, this is time. This one's time, but on the scatter plot, this x-axis is the supply rate inflation. So that's why I'm going back to the other one to show you that the times that we're looking at here, from 5% supply rate inflation to 25% supply rate inflation. I wish I didn't have to continually say supply rate inflation, but there is this confusing terminology in economics where some people say inflation and they mean what's the rate at which you're increasing the supply of a monetary unit, and then other people say inflation and they mean how fast are goods prices going up, and they're different things. So I have to be careful to always specify. This is the supply rate inflation along the x-axis, and the y-axis is showing two things: one for the blue series and one for the red series. The blue series is kind of more easy to understand. So I'll probably start with that. The price of appreciation. That's just like what percent is the price of dash going up or down based on what the supply rate is doing. And so, like I said, you would expect a positive relationship if increasing the supply of something always led to price depreciation or appreciation. But you don't see a clear correlation here is the point. That's the whole point, is that there's no like, oh, there's a trend line that's clearly as we increase the supply rate, then prices going down, or inflation is going up. There's not that clear correlation. In fact, if there's any correlation, it's the opposite of that. Look at this period right here. This blue line maybe has.
The blue dots look pretty random.
It looks pretty random, but if you did want to say that this is a trend right here, you'd say, hey, we had a supply rate inflation of 15%, and the price was appreciating at close to 262%. So, but then as we went through time, our supply rate is decreasing to 20% here, the supply rate is increasing up here. And so there's a negative trend here. But the whole point is that it's just kind of a big blob. And that's what I was kind of showing before here, is like, the price is not reflected in the supply rate increase. It's not a function of that. If it were, you'd see a clear correlation one way or another. But the most recent data, you don't even see that at all. And
accounting for circulating supply.
It's not accounting for circulating, it's just total supply. Actually, I do want to do the analysis on the circulating supply if that's of interest, but I have to pull in masternode data for that before. So anyway, to bring it back in one sentence, we need what creates the value and hopefully long run price appreciation is creating real economic value through what I think is most importantly through something like a venture-backed companies that are not traditional venture-backed companies, but Dash-based venture-backed companies. That's what would create value in the Dash ecosystem, and that's what we can control. So I'll end it